disconnected. Could you kindly assign me as an Arabic interpreter or Ahab?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I'll ask for your patience for a few minutes while we allow more people in from the waiting room. And I accidentally muted all the interpreters, so as long as they can unmute those. Okay. So my name is Sarah Martin. I am the moderator of the Community of Practice, the GBV AOR Community of Practice. And we will be sharing all of the presentations today, except for the Girlshine presentation, which will be shared later this month on the Community of Practice channel. For those of you who are not familiar with the GBV AOR Community of Practice, we are a virtual online community of gender-based violence specialists who meet online, and we host different webinars and events for our participants. And all of these webinars are recorded. You can find them on the GBV AOR YouTube channel, and we will share a link with that later on during the webinar. So today's webinar is going to be focusing on the importance of a gender transformative approach to working with women and girls safe space programming in humanitarian emergencies. We know that in humanitarian settings, gender inequality is one of the root causes of GBV, and it remains a huge structural barrier to women and girls' participation. So because it's a little bit loud here, I'll cut my introduction short, and I'm just going to move forward to introducing the Whole of Syria UNFPA program and the GBV AOR there, who promoted this webinar and will be talking to you a bit more about it. So without further ado, go ahead, Laura or Fulvia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, my name is Laura Marchesini, and I am here today to introduce the findings Fulvia will present. Fulvia will follow this presentation by presenting the main finding of the Transcending Norms research, and that are looking at the potential of women and girls safe space programming to achieve gender transformation. So I'm doing a very short technical introduction. The technical concept that I'm going to present in the next 10 minutes are based on the finding of the research Fulvia will present. So when we talk about gender transformation, we are thinking about an implementation of a program that is looking at that as a foundation on the multi-sectorial approach and on the socio-ecological model. So with this in mind, we have to think that we are thinking an implementation that is examining, recognizing, reviewing what are the gender norms and the inequalities in terms of power balance in a specific society or community that usually are advantages boys and men over women and girls. When we talk about gender transformation, we have also to take into consideration the importance of tackle root causes of gender-based violence and gender inequality to reshape the equal power relationship and to strengthening positive norm that supports equality. And through women and girls safe space programming, think about an enabling environment for gender equality that is part of our objective of our implementation. At the same time, when we talk about gender transformative implementation, we are talking about promoting the role and the position of women and girls. We are talking about promoting the transformation of the social structure that usually serve to reinforce gender inequality, and we want to shift to reinforcing a gender equality, redressing the power dynamic and redressing the social structure. Next slide, please. So the Women and Girls Safe Space Toolkit that was developed in 2019 by International Medical Corps and International Rescue Committee gave us a little bit the framework of Women and Girls Safe Space programming. So we have just said that the implementation of gender transformative intervention has to keep in mind the socio-ecological model. Now, if we look at the Women and Girls Safe Space Toolkit, we see that our overall objective is the empowerment of women and girls. How do we reach the empowerment of women and girls? We reach the empowerment of women and girls through the implementation of 5 specific objectives. Now we are going to look at them quickly. I would like to ask the participants in the room to just think about the different level of the socio-ecological model and to think our Women and Girls Safe Space intervention, how much actually work in, objective by objective of the different level of the socio-ecological model, and to start to have a reflection on that. So the first objective of the Women and Girls Space is to facilitate the access to knowledge, skills and range of relevant services. To support women and girls' psychosocial well-being and the creation of social network. To serve as a place to organize and access information, resources, and to reduce the risk of violence. Is an entry point for GBV specialized services. And finally, it is a place to provide the opportunity to raise the voice, to speak up about rights, to speak up about needs, specific needs of women and girls. This is our framework. No, just a second, Sarah, sorry, can you come back to the previous slide? Thank you. So this is more or less our framework. We are looking at our objective, empowerment objective, and 5 specific objectives to reach the empowerment. But what we are trying to say today is that Women and Girls Safe Space, by working toward those 5 specific objectives, has a potential for gender transformation, but it is not a given package. So by working on these 5 objectives without taking into account the different level of the ecological model, the Women and Girls Safe Space may fail to achieve gender transformation. There is a need of an intentionality. There is a need of a strategy to achieve gender transformation, maintaining the same objective, but having in mind the potential and the opportunity for a gender transformation that we have through Women and Girls Safe Space programming. This is explained in the next slide. Sarah, thank you now. Okay, so this slide is kind of summarizing what is our logic behind the gender transformative potential of Women and Girls Space programming. As I said, this is coming from the research that Fulvia is going to present after my presentation. So the first box that you see on the left, it is giving a context. It is our gender analysis. It is giving us a context. It's saying there is some kind of subordination women and girls suffer against men and boys. There is a gender hierarchies and dynamic that discriminates against women and girls. And those are kind of the condition that we find often when we work in a humanitarian setting. And this is why we decide to open up a Women and Girls Safe Space. We identify there is a need of GBV prevention, response, and mitigation, and there is a need of women and girls empowerment programming. So we open a Women and Girls Safe Space due to the context that we have analyzed, and we decide to work on different type of empowerment as explained in the Women and Girls Safe Space toolkit. So we can work on different type of empowerment. We mentioned 4 of them in the toolkit, but there can be more. So we already have an important piece to think about gender transformation. We have the context, we have the empowerment programming, and we know that we are already working on the power of women and girls, because in Women and Girls Safe Spaces, we work on the power within of women and girls by women GBV services, for example, or by engaging women and girls into co-facilitating activities. We work into power with by creating safety network, social network among participants. We work on the power too, having similar objective, having advocacy point to strengthen women and girls' capacity to raise their voices, their needs. So if we take our program, this empowerment component of our program, and we try to implement it at the different level of the ecological model, individual, relationship, community, and societal level, most probably we are already strategizing how to achieve gender transformation, because we are going to tackle the different root causes of gender-based violence and gender inequality and power dynamic at the different level of the socio-ecological model. Next slide, Sarah, please. So what we are just saying here to conclude is that the potential for gender transformation is already there. The effort we are putting in place to achieve the empowerment may go beyond the empowerment if this is properly thought, if this is properly strategized, and this is properly identified as a potential. As we are already working on tackle GBV root causes, gender inequality, imbalance of power, disregards of women's rights. And we are already looking at intervention that challenge gender norms and influence the power of women in the community. So we are already working on transforming the structure of subordination. So with the intention and the strategy, and with in mind the socio-ecological model, we may better understand how to achieve gender transformation. So I will conclude here. I know this was very technical. This was just an introduction to what Fulvia will then operationalize a bit more through the finding of the research. Thank you. The floor to you, to Fulvia.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening. My name is Fulvia. I work at UNFPA Regional Humanitarian Hub for Syria and the Arab states, and I'm the regional GBV specialist. So it's really a pleasure having the opportunity to present these findings, and also looking at some of the good practices of gender transformational approaches in women and girls safe spaces across different regions that will be presented after we introduce the topic of gender transformative approaches. So I think that just to give you a bit of a background, this document, I put the link also in the chat, was developed by the office where I sit as a knowledge product in order to understand, identify and bridge gaps regarding women and girls safe space capacity to offer a more gender transformative approach. In particular, we looked at those vocational trainings and skills building activity that are offered through the women and girls safe spaces. As we know, and I think I preach to the choir here, many times we visit a women and girls safe space and we ask about skills building or vocational training. So we end up visiting activities related to sewing and cooking. So some of those activities kind of reiterate gender stereotypes that, as Laura was saying, we are trying to overcome through women and girls safe spaces as a GBV in emergency program. So why does that happen? Why are we offering these kind of activities? And how can we change that to engage women and girls in choosing themselves and in offering as an organization different types of less gender stereotyped and more gender transformative opportunities. So that was the basis of this document. The document, next slide, please. The document was developed in the framework of the Arab states region. So it included key format interviews, focus group discussion in 8 different humanitarian contexts that including targeting refugee context, IDP context, local communities, acute and protracted crisis, as well as nexus settings. So a very large scope and different scope of the data gathering. I want to go though to the next slide very quickly and to introduce what are the main findings of this knowledge product. Finding one is, and this links very well to what Laura was saying in the introduction, women and girls safe spaces and their program are gender transformative by itself. The second finding is that, however, the impact of gender transformative approaches vary significantly among women and girls safe spaces, and this is due to various factors across the socio-ecological model. So we looked at the individual dimension, the interpersonal relationship dimension, and the community dimension. So all these 3 levels, there are factors in each of these 3 levels that impact the success of these gender transformative approaches. And then the third finding is that enhancing this gender transformative potential within the Women and Girls Safe Space programming requires intentional, sustained investment in the Women and Girls Safe Space, but also outside of the Women and Girls Safe Space. So beyond the safe space, which means more within the family, within the community, and more broadly within the society. However, we did not look at the societal level, so we stopped at the community level. So I'll dig deeper into these findings a little bit. Next slide, please, on finding 1. So as we were saying, safe spaces are gender transformative by themselves. And this is mainly due to the fact that they are only open to women and girls. So this makes, at least in the Arab region, this makes these spaces one of the few places where women and girls feel safe, can access without also not too many difficulties in getting the approval by their husbands, their parents to go and participate in the activities. So it's an opportunity to be safe, but outside of the home. It facilitates access to information and to services, and also it increases their agencies, their decision making. Vocational trainings and awareness raising activities are the ones that women and girls consider more transformational, and this is linked to the psychosocial outcome, but also the income generating opportunities that come out of the vocational training and the skills building. And women and girls feel valued as a person, as within the community. This transformational potential has a spillover at the individual level, have spillovers within the families and within the communities. For example, it helps the shift in power dynamics within the family, giving women greater autonomy. It increases communication and improves communications and problem solving at home with the husband or partners. It opens us up to more dialogue around activities in women and girls safe spaces, and also, especially for adolescent girls, then greater access to women and girls safe spaces when the family, the parents understand what the adolescent girls are going to do in the women and girls safe space. It also has spillovers in changes in the treatment of female and male children and greater confidence and self-worth. So more women and girls are more able to stand up for their rights. Next, please. I just wanted to read a quote that came out of this document. The first one: my family always saw me as less than whole because I gave birth to 3 daughters. But after participating in the awareness raising sessions, I started to feel valued and important as a woman. And I also valued my daughters even more. So this is speaks to this transformational element at individual level and in the family, in the community. Next, please. The second finding, I think, is the one that gives more opportunity also to think of the change that we need to put in. So the impact of these gender transformative approaches varies significantly. So this means that what we found out is when offered the choice of activities, women are often selecting traditional activities themselves that perpetuate these harmful gender norms. So many times when we ask, again, I go back to the visit of the Women and Girls Safe Space, and we ask, why do you offer only the sewing, the cooking, and partners or people working in the Women and Girls Safe Space say, this is what the women and girls ask us. So how do we also change that requests by women and girls? So at individual barriers, there are individual barriers towards that transformation. Some are issues related to prioritization. So what we found out is that many women and families in these communities are struggling to meet their basic needs. So the choice of the activity is linked to the prioritization of survival, safety, belonging. There are issues related to agency. So we found out that programs often failed to meet the requirements of people targeted, or they fail to foster sufficient aspiration to encourage gender transformative choices. So women and girls are not encouraged to look and choose outside of the box, let's say. Moreover, the vocational activities options meet women and girls' needs, but they do not always reflect the hopes and dreams or, again, provide aspirational goals. Again, linked to agency, women and girls are able to make choice within the sphere of the activities presented by the staff. And women and girls are not consulted or involved as much in defining what could be those activities. Of course, there might be budget, staffing, time limitations that hinder the possibility to engage women and girls, and we'll see this into the recommendation. Fear of failure is also recurring as a cross-generational theme. So women and girls fear that if they choose carpentry, they will not be successful. There are also specific requests related to more advanced and longer courses, building on previous one. I don't know, permission to enroll in more than one course, decreasing waiting lists. So women and girls gave us very concrete examples of how they want the change to look like. And in terms of gender roles as responsibilities, there are issues related to the economic drivers of the choice. So the women and girls choose the skills that they can translate into an income very quickly. Women and girls prefer traditional activities that they can do, for example, within the house, or that they can do making sure that they can also continue their household responsibility, cooking, cleaning, caregiving responsibility. Women and girls sometimes are unmotivated to learn new skills because there is a general lack of opportunity to apply these skills in the real life scenarios. So they say, yes, but if I go into a carpentry, as I was saying, activity, then I will not find a job because this is looked as a more traditional man role, and then nobody will trust a woman carpenter as much as a man carpenter. So I will not have options to put that in place. I'll stop here also because I know there is many more things to look at. But so this is at individual level, but then there are interpersonal barriers. So outside of the women and girls safe space, when women and girls go back to their families, to their communities, husbands and other male family members limit women's and girls' activity options, even when they are supportive of them participating in women and girls safe spaces activities. So they also have a saying on what women and girls can choose within the women and girls safe spaces. And at community level, there is the environment, the traditions, the cultural pride, and what I was saying before also, the limited options for women to explore what are normally considered more men traditional jobs or opportunities within the community. Next, please. The third finding is more that enhancing the gender transformative potential, as I was saying, needs to have intentional and sustained investment within the women and girls safe space. So giving more space for focus group discussion, for participation, for creative thinking, and for, I don't know, training on how to start and manage small projects, business development courses, etc. But also it needs investment outside of the women and girls safe space, especially with men and boys in the community and other gatekeepers. So engage the broad men and boys and the broad community in social norms change activities, in awareness raising, in sensitization, engaging them in understanding more what happens within the women and girls safe space, etc., can have positive change in the approaches and in the way we do things in the women and girls safe spaces. Next, please. So I think that I wanted to point out here I talked a lot about income generating activities, access to livelihood, etc. And one big question mark that this document did not really answer is how do we engage more in livelihood activities within the women and girls safe space? And we didn't get to an answer because we know that the women and girls safe space objective, as Laura said at the beginning, is more stops within more the psychosocial dimension and rather than the income generating dimension. So I wanted to just point out that even the vocational trainings or the skills building activities or the recreational activities that are done with that specific psychosocial intent has a gender transformative potential. So we do not encourage income generating activities per se if there are no opportunities, there are no skills, and as we will see in the recommendation, we encourage more income generating activities through partnerships and maybe even beyond the women and girls safe space itself, if there are not the capacity to implement them in the women and girls safe space itself. So I want to go quickly to the recommendations with the next slide. First of all, strengthening capacities of the staff on gender transformation approaches. And looking at the attitudes and the beliefs of staff that maybe sometimes they also reiterate these gender stereotypes and therefore are limiting the potential of the women and girls safe spaces. Second, we saw in the findings, we need to make sure that women and girls participate and are empowered through making them part of the decision making. So how do we do this? We support women and girls towards the normalization of being different, of overcoming the fears and concerns that come with choosing non-conventional activities or challenging stereotyped gender norms. We also need to raise awareness of women and girls on the options available to them. Always being careful of honoring their individual gender identities. We need to make them part of the decisions of the activities that they want to see in the women and girls safe spaces. And also then more specifically on the activities development and selection, on this nice bubble graph on the right, what do we need to have in there? Practice and give space to women and girls decision making. These activities need to be based on women and girls' needs. They need to involve women and girls in assess what are the options available. We need to take into consideration women and girls' fears and concerns and influences, and need to address how to mitigate these. They need to offer different and creative training opportunities and different creative options. I think this is, in a nutshell, how do we enhance participation and empowerment. Next slide, please. In terms of community engagement, what do we do? We need to share more broadly what is the Women and Girls Safe Space purpose with the families and the communities. We need to work with parents and peers to make sure, and other gatekeepers to make sure they become allies of what happens in the Women and Girls Safe Space. And we need to be creative to strengthen the support to women and girls safe space. As said, we need to work on social norms and prevention programs for the larger community, especially for men and boys. And we need to be aware and address the staff bias and filters, as I was saying. And next. We also had recommendations in terms of partnership and funding. So as I was saying before, in terms of partnership, we do need to look into partnering with livelihood experts, private sectors, and possibly looking also conducting market analysis and understanding where the skills learned in the Women and Girls Safe Space can be applied outside of the safe space. In terms of funding, we need to assess what is our organization capacity to work on gender transformation, and then we need to direct the resources towards what is feasible and realistic. We need to include funding for consultation with women and girls to assess and decide what are the activities that they want to have. We need to advocate and be flexible with our partners to allow for changes in the women and girls safe space activities, and to allow space for women and girls to choose. And then we need to advocate for long-term funding. In the resource, in the document, you will also find some recommendation for the donors themselves. So these recommendations for donors are sustain women and girls safe space as a core protection, empowerment, and gender transformative intervention. So we need to increasingly advocate for the value of the women and girls safe space as within the GBV in emergency program. Then we need to advocate for to recognize the critical role of women-led organization in the gender transformative work within the women and girls safe space. Donors need to provide more flexible funding for women and girls safe spaces activities in order to have that flexibility to choose select activities on the basis of needs and hopes and dreams of the women and girls. And then possibly also strategize and advocate for funding to be more multi-year and long-term to sustain the activities in the women and girls safe spaces. and for donors also to understand and recognize and sustain, support the investment in the gender transformative approaches within the Women and Girls Safe Spaces programming. The document has and suggests some promising practices, which is the next slide, but I don't want to take too much time, and I want to leave the floor to the promising practices that will be presented today. So maybe over to you, Sarah, for the presentation of these, and then to give the floor to Jordan, Myanmar, and the Girlshine, so I guess IRC.
Thank you so much, Fulvia. We did have a couple of little questions that we wanted to give a few minutes to. One of them was about whether or not you were able to assess which girls regularly attend the Women and Girls Safe Spaces versus whose do not, and whether or not that had some impact on the findings too.
Yes, so I think what we can do is to say the adolescent girls that participated in the data gathering, I think, which were mostly older adolescent girls. So within the age group of 15 to 19, let's say, adolescent girls within that age. But I don't think that specifically within the framework of this document, we looked at that question. I think that what we noticed was that adolescent girls were particularly affected by the freedom of movement, or the lack of freedom of movement. So they had additional layers of challenges at the individual level, but also at the interpersonal level, because their choice to participate in Women and Girls Safe Spaces activities had to go through a permission from their fathers, their mothers, and other family members, sometimes, for example, the brothers within the family. So that was specific to adolescent girls, but also what was interesting was to see that adolescent girls were also the more vocal in advocating for that thinking outside of the box, activities that are outside of the box. So they were the more vocal in asking for electronics related activities, computer science, or I don't know, plumbing, carpentry, etc. So those activities that were more gender transformational and less less in line with what we normally offer.
Okay, great. And you touched upon this very briefly, and I know it's not the exact focus of the seminar, but two people were really interested about how the shifts were in the power dynamics between the women and girls participating and their male family members. Do you have a few words to say to that? And after that, we'll move on to the next speakers.
Yeah, so I think that, I touched upon this on the first finding. So how the individual level, the transformation at individual level have spillovers in the family. So I think what I mentioned, that what came out of this document was mostly in better communication and problem solving within the family, better greater autonomy of women in choosing to attend the Women and Girls Safe Spaces, and also on the girls, and better shift in power dynamics also within the family. So decision making also was more shared between husband and wife or parents, and there was also a shift in more dialogues and changes in the treatment of female versus male children within the family. And there was also a greater self-worth worth, and therefore women and girls were also more able to speak up for themselves in the context of the family, extended family, and sometimes even in the community. And there was also then a bit of more trust in women and the potential of women and girls within the community, and which is also a message that is very important to pass. How much women and girls are important within the community is a message that that men and boys and other gatekeepers in the community need to be aware of. So how the Women and Girls Safe Space help women to be a better
seen. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that, Fulvia, and for Laura. I don't see our next speaker in our participant list, and I would just remind everyone, if they can, to rename themselves correctly, because I think we shared some links, so a lot of people have duplicate names. And until I find her to share, we'll just shift the program a little bit, and we'll ask Myanmar, the Meta Foundation, to please present next. And then if we find our Jordanian presenter, we'll come back to her. So, so without any further ado. Oh, are you? Okay,
yes.
Great.
And as far as I know, I'm named correctly, so I'm not sure.
Okay, ba tomorrow yata Pumpio Foundation Gane low sound as is in lay report no Arihago and Nang Shimpiado Bare. Next slide, no. Community based GBV prevention and response go low sound nema tomorrow and net Kachimpi nema the town goya house at Kunikane Sabi tomorrow conflict picade no every now by tomorrow ceasefire and then you tabi the tema the towns set the Kunip Lama conflict Sabi Masa Dinkede alone tomorrow si shall to rega Miaji trapye ding shall la Kaya no alone nema the town set the Kunip Pipiari Lama, the Tamaro Tamadora, nebo not the Biambima, thing you like it, but not every and a Tama, the KIA net, Myanmar military Rigane, Bima, Taikamuka, Punyala, Tema, Tamaro Kasi sound to Riga, Bima, Yala, Biro, Tamaro Dilo Pinede, and ne Tama, but not Tamaro and ne. Do ye 2 powder ya report no international humanitarian but the bimale tomorrow ya by queen social ne harry gender based violence but the bima pilare ya report no the kali the near go but no violation pit the harry kale myaji pilare tomorrow ne the local tema IDB got the thing Joshi report, not the thing Joshi tema tomorrow and then IDB camp they are gonna set the camp sheet tema the UNFBA net tomorrow low sound there IDB camp got wrong as a IDB camp go tomorrow account tape for prevention and response activity later go low sound and keep it. Next slide. So tomorrow and you check about prevention and response but not protection, gender based violence. Myanmar in for women and girl to ye lungi go tomorrow protection and response biolo nine boya ye be ye amyoda ye net mingling ye amyoda report not the as sexual reproductive and head and right ne pata bima tomorrow and ne do to ro go one samuya ya but not to ro go tomorrow and ne dane pata de a down ya go bima to ro go kakwana ya the tomorrow government control area, your non-government control area remal account look sample ye. Be now tactical and nene garopo, not tomorrow and nene SRS နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ကျန်းမာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့လိင်နဲ့မျိုးဆက်ပွားကျန်းမာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုကျမတို့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေကိုရယူရ adolescent တွေနဲ့ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ friend ဖြစ်အောင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီတာတူညီမျှတဲ့အခွင့်အရေးတွေပြီးရင်ကျမတို့ဒါတွေကို access ရနိုင်အောင်လုပ်ဆောင်ဖို့အတွက်လည်းကျမတို့ရည်ရွယ်ပြီးမှလုပ်ဆောင်တာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပြောင်းလို့ရပါပြီwomen and girls center ပေါ့နော်ခုနပြောသွားသလိုပဲပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ကချင်ပြည်နယ်မှာwomen and girls center ကို7ခုအနေနဲ့ UNFPA နဲ့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုလုပ်ငန်းတွေကိုအကောင့်အထည်လုပ်ဆောင်တယ် women and girls center က GCA မှာကြတော့ women and girls center 3ခုရှိတယ်ပြီးရင် NGC area မှာက women and girls center 8ခုရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုအမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးငယ်တွေကိုအဲ့ဒီ women and girls center မှာလာရောက်ခြင်းအပြင်ပဲပေါ့နော်case management ရောပြီးရင် GBV နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ counseling တွေကိုခံယူနိုင်တယ်ပြီးရင် individual psychosocial support ရဲ့ group psychosocial support activity လေးတွေကိုလည်းအဲ့ဒီကနေစပြီးမှဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေရယူနိုင်တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီကနေကျမတို့ပေါ့နော်တစ်ဆက်ချင်းဒီကြိုတင်ကာကွယ်တုံ့ပြန်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်အမြင်ဖွင့်တဲ့ section လေးတွေကပို့ပြီးမှတွင်ကြဲလုံးဆောင်လာနိုင်တယ်အဲ့ဒီ section လေးပေါ်မှာမူတည်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ man engagement section လေးတွေကပို့ပြီးမှအရေးကြီးတယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုသိရှိလာတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်သူတို့ရဲ့ဒီ women and girls center မှာလာတဲ့အမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးငယ်တွေရဲ့ပြောပြချက်အရာဒီ section လေးတွေကိုလည်းကျမတို့လှုပ်ဆောင်လာနိုင်တယ်ပြီးရင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီအဲ့ဒီထက်မကပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ဒီ community မှာရှိတဲ့အမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးတွေရောပို့ပြီးမှဝန်ဆောင်မှုကိုရလို့လာနိုင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီတဲ့ကြောင့်ကျမတို့ volunteer လေးတွေကလည်းပို့ထက်လာတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီ volunteer လေးတွေကဒီ women and girls center မှာ learning speed ဖြစ်တယ်လို့ women empowerment အတွက်လည်းဖြစ်ခဲ့တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီဟာကကျမတို့ community ရဲ့ base intervention အတွက်များစွာအထောက်အကူဖြစ်တဲ့နေရာလည်းဖြစ်ခဲ့ပါတယ်women and girl intervention လို့ပြောလိုက်တဲ့အချိန်မှာကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီ case management service ကိုနဲ့ဒီ GBV counseling ကိုအဲ့ဒီ women and girl center မှာလုပ်တယ် women and girl center ကိုခုနကျမတို့ presentation မှာ share slide တွေလည်းပြောသွားတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ women and girl center ဟာ safe space ဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ center မှာအမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးငယ်အတွက်လုံခြုံတဲ့နေရာဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့အရာကြီးလူထုအတွက်တိဖို့ကလည်းအရေးကြီးတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီမှာလည်းသူတို့ကယုံကြည်မှုရှိပြီးမှကျမတို့ women and girl center ကကျမတို့အတွက်ကောင်းမွန်တဲ့ဖန်တီးမှုလေးတစ်ခုဖြစ်နေပေါ့အရေးလေးအရေးကြီးတယ် GBV survivor တွေအတွက်လည်းဒီနေရာကတော့အရေးကြီးတယ်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်ကြောင့်လည်းကျမတို့ women and girl center မှာလာတဲ့လူတွေကပေါ့နော်တက်တောင့်တက်တာလေးဖြစ်တယ် women and girl center မှာရောက်လာခြင်းအပြင်စိတ်ပျော်ရွှင်မှုလေးတွေလည်းရတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့ women and girl center မှာလာတဲ့အမျိုးသမီးတွေကပေါ့နော်သူတို့ရဲ့အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းအတွက်အသက်မွေးဝမ်းကြောင်းလုပ်ငန်းလုပ်ဖို့အတွက်ကိုရောဒီအဲ့ဒီ center ကနဲ့ရရှိတဲ့ဗဟုသုတလေးတွေအများကြီးရတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီဟာကတော့ပေါ့နော် group psychosocial support activity လေးတွေကိုခေါ်လုပ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီမှာဆိုရင်ဝင်ငွေရတဲ့လုပ်ငန်းတွေလည်းဖြစ်တဲ့ဆက်ပြားလုပ်ငန်းတွေပေါ့နော် crystal လုပ်ငန်းဒါမျိုးတွေလုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့အခြေအနေမှာလည်းဝင်ငွေရတဲ့လုပ်ငန်းတွေလည်းရတယ်ပြီးရင်ကျန်းမာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ referral legal နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ဘိုင်းမှာရောပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အချိန်ကြီးတုံ့ပြန်နိုင်ဖို့ကအဲ့ဒီနေရာကနေဝန်ဆောင်မှုလေးတွေကိုလည်းရပါတယ်women and girl center မှာပေါ့နော် intervention လို့ပြောလိုက်တဲ့အချိန်မှာကျမတို့သူတို့ရဲ့ပို့ဖို့တူတာလေးတွေပြီးရင်သူတို့ရဲ့ emotional learning speed လေးတွေဖြစ်အောင်အတွက်ကျမတို့ဒီဖန်တီးလှုပ်ဆောင်ထားတဲ့အတွက်ပေါ့နော်ဒီလူထု women and girl တွေက PSS activity တွေလုပ်တဲ့အချိန်မှာ handicraft activity လေးတွေလုပ်တယ်လို့ကို mindfulness ဖြစ်အောင်အတွက်ပေါ့နော်ဆူတောင်းတဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးတွေလုပ်တဲ့ဟာတွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီgas center တဲ့ရောက်လာတဲ့အချိန်မှာသူတို့ပေါ့နော်ဘာလေးတွေလုပ်ရအောင်ဆိုပြီးမှသူတို့ကနဲ့သူတို့ပြောပြီးမှ activity လေးတွေဝိုင်းပြီးမှခေါ်လုပ်တဲ့ဟာမျိုးတွေလုပ်တယ်တခါလီကြရင်ပေါ့နော်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ကိုပေါ့နော်ယုံကြည်မှုရှိလာအောင်ပြောဆိုတဲ့အပိုင်းကဏ္ဍတွေကိုလည်းပို့ပြီးမှဖြစ်လာအောင်သူတို့လှုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့ဥပမာအားဖြင့်ဆိုရင်လည်း mask လုပ်တဲ့လုပ်ငန်းတွေပေါ့နော် mask တွေ covid ခါလာမှာတွေဆိုဒါလေးတွေလည်းလုပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပဲအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေကြားမှာပေါ့နော်သူတို့ဝင်ငွေရအောင်ချိတ်ဆက်ပေးတဲ့ဟာလေးတွေကိုလည်းအဲ့ဒီစင်တာမှာလာတဲ့မျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးငယ်တွေလုပ်တဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးမှလည်းလုပ်တယ် women and girl center တွေကများတော့အဖြစ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီစင်တာမှာလာတဲ့ဟာကိုတစ်ချိန်ရောက်လာတဲ့အချိန်ဆိုနောက်တစ်ချိန်လာရှင်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီနေရာမှာပေါ့နော် individual counseling လုပ်တဲ့နေရာကပေါ့နော်ဒီ GBV survivor မဟုတ်တင်လေပေါ့နော်ဒီတိုင်းကျမတို့လူမှုရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းပြောနိုင်တဲ့နေရာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်သူတို့အနေနဲ့အဲ့ဒီ women and girl center ကသူတို့အတွက်များစွာပေါ့နော်စိတ်ကျေနပ်မှုရရှိတယ်ပြီးရင်တက်တောင့်တက်တာဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီနေရာမှာလာခြင်းအဖြစ်သူတို့အတွက်ရှေ့ဆက်မဲ့ကာလမှာခွန်အားရတဲ့နေရာလေးတစ်ခုလည်းဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုလည်းသူတို့ရဲ့ feedback တွေထဲကနေကျမတို့လည်းရရှိထားပါတယ်ပြီးရင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ prevention activity မှာဆိုရင်လည်းအဲ့ဒီမှာကျမတို့ women and girl center မှာ awareness session တွေလုပ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီကနေပဲပေါ့နော်ဒီအမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးငယ်တွေကဒီအမျိုးသားတွေကိုဒီ12နှစ်နဲ့50နှစ်ကြားကအမျိုးသမီးတွေဆိုရင်group like ရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ရောက်လာတဲ့အခြေအနေမှာဆိုရင်အမျိုးသမီးအသက်အရွယ်အပိုင်းအခြားလိုက်12နှစ်ကနေကျမတို့အနေနဲ့16နှစ်ကြားမှာဆိုရင်သူတို့ကိုတစ်ဖွဲ့လေးလုပ်ပေးလိုက်တယ်ဟိုအသက်ကြီးပိုင်းဆိုရင်ကတစ်ဖွဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီမတူညီတဲ့အသက်အပိုင်းအခြားလိုက်သူတို့ကိုawareness တွေလုပ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီမှာဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ဒီ GBV ဖြစ်စေနိုင်တဲ့အကြောင်းရင်းပေါ့နော် root cause လေးတွေပြောတယ်ပြီးရင် power မညီမျှမှုကြောင့်power ကိုဘယ်လိုမျိုး share ပြီးမှသုံးရမယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာပေါ့နော်ဒီဟာတွေပြီးရင် human right နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေပေါ့နော်တာတူညီမျှမှုရှိဖို့အတွက်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်ဒီ SRHR နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေ family planning နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုကျမတို့အဲ့ဒီမှာ awareness တွေလုပ်တယ် family planning လို့ပြောလိုက်တဲ့အချိန်မှာကျမတို့အဖွဲ့ကနေအဖွဲ့အစည်းကနေကျမရေးဌာနကနေချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးမှရလာတဲ့ condom တို့ဟာလိုမျိုးတွေလည်းကျမတို့အဲ့ဒီ women and girl center မှာထားပြီးမှဖြန့်ဝေတဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီ women and girl center မှာရောက်ရှိလာတဲ့အမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးတွေအနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော် men တွေကိုပေါ့နော် engagement လုပ်ရမယ်ဒီ information တွေကသူတို့ကိုလည်းတိမှတာလင်း GBV ကရော့ကျသွားမယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာတွေကိုသူတို့ကပြောတယ်ဒီသူတို့စီကတံပြင်းမှကျမတို့ကြားရတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်ကြောင့်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ community based mobile package နဲ့စတင်ပြီးမှဒီ man engagement ကို awareness raising တွေမှာလုပ်နိုင်ခဲ့တယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင် group psycho social support activity တွေကိုလည်းအမျိုးသားတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်တဲ့အစီအစဉ်တွေကိုလည်းလုပ်ဆောင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ women and girl center intervention ထဲမှာဆိုရင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ community based volunteer တွေရဲ့တင်ကြားမှုရတဲ့နေရာလေးတစ်ခုလည်းဖြစ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်women တွေ empowerment ဖြစ်လာအောင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့သူတို့ကိုအဲ့ဒီနေရာကနေစတင်ပြီးမှသူတို့ရဲ့သူတို့စီမှာတင်ကြားလို့ရတယ်သူတို့ရဲ့ဦးစီးဦးဆောင်မှုတွေရအောင်ကျမတို့အဲ့ဒီနေရာမှာလှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ခဲ့တယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီဟာကတော့ပုံမှန်ဒီ women group တွေ men group တွေရှိတယ်ကျမတို့ youth group တွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီကိုလူဦးစီးဦးဆောင်တဲ့ volunteer တွေကဒီ women center ပေါ့နော်ဒါကို organize လုပ်ပြီးမှပုံမှန် activity ပုံမှန်အနေနဲ့တွေ့ဆုံပြီးမှသူတို့ရဲ့ခန်းစားချက်လေးတွေကိုပြန်ပြီးမှတင်ပြနိုင်အောင်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီ covid ခါလာမှာတုန်းကဆိုရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီ volunteer လေးတွေရှိတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်ဒီ group လေးတွေကိုဦးစီးဦးဆောင်ဖို့ရပြီးရင်သူတို့ရဲ့ community မှာဖြစ်နေတဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုလည်းပိုပြီးမှထိထိရောက်ရောက်မြန်မြန်ဆန်ဆန်သုံးပြန်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကျမတို့လွန်ခဲ့တဲ့အချိန်မှာကတော့ကျမတို့non paid volunteer ဖြစ်ခဲ့တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ covid ကာလမှာကျမတို့သူတို့ကိုပိုပြီးမှစွမ်းဆောင်ရည်မြင့်လာအောင် community based mobilizer ဆိုပြီးမှသူတို့ကိုကျမတို့အမည်လေးတွေတပ်ပြီးမှသူတို့ကိုincentive ပေးတဲ့ဟာလေးတွေပေါ့နော်သူတို့ရဲ့ role ကိုမြင့်တင်ပေးတဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးတွေလုပ်တယ်အဲ့လိုပဲပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အဲ့လိုလှုပ်ဆောင်ခြင်းအပြင်သူတို့အနေနဲ့camp ထဲမှာရှိတဲ့ဟာတွေပေါ့နော်ဒီ case reporting and receiving case management ကိုလှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ဆိုရင်သူတို့က mobile phone လေးတွေပေးထားတယ်ပေါ့နော်တချို့တွေက mobile phone လေးနဲ့ဆက်ပြီးမှကျမတို့ကို refer ဖို့ခက်ခဲတဲ့လူတွေကိုသူတို့အနေနဲ့ကူညီပြီးမှဒါလေးတွေကိုအချိန်မီပေါ့နော်ကျမရင်းနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ဝန်ဆောင်မှုလေးတွေကိုလည်းရနိုင်အောင်လှုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးတွေလည်းလုပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်WGC မှာရှိတဲ့ကျမတို့ရဲ့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေနဲ့လည်းချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်ဒီတဦးချင်းဆိုင်ရာ counseling တွေကိုလုပ်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်လည်းလှုပ်ဆောင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်community based prevention activity မှာကတော့ကျမတို့ပေါ့နော် community awareness activity တွေကိုလုပ်တယ် community group discussion လေးတွေကိုလုပ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီကတော့ဘာလဲဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ women and girl center မှာလာတဲ့အမျိုးသမီးနဲ့မိန်းကလေးတွေကကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီကချင်မြန်မာနိုင်ငံမှာရှိတဲ့ဒီအခြေအနေအရာပေါ့နော်ဒီ group လေးတွေနဲ့ကျမတို့လှုပ်ဆောင်ရတဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးကပို့ပြီးမှချစ်ထိရောက်ရောက်ရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်ကြောင့်ကျမတို့ဒီ women group လေးတွေကိုဖွဲ့လိုက်ပြီးမှသူတို့ရဲ့empowerment ဖြစ်လာအောင်ပြီးရင် man group လေးတွေ youth group လေးတွေပေါ့နော်သူတို့စီကအကြံလေးတွေပေါ့နော်ဒီဝိုင်းဝန်းပြီးမှသူတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်GBV awareness session မှာဆိုရင်လည်းပို့ပြီးမှထိထိရောက်ရောက်လုပ်နိုင်အောင်လုပ်ဆောင်တယ်ပြီးရင် safety audit ကိုလည်းသူတို့အနေနဲ့ဦးစီးဦးဆောင်ပြီးမှသူတို့ကိုယ်တိုင်ပေါ့နော်ဘယ်လိုမျိုးဖြည့်ရှင်းနိုင်မယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုကိုယ့်အခြေတောက်ကိုရည်တည်ပြီးမှလုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်အောင်လည်းလုပ်ဆောင်ခဲ့ပါတယ်youth group လေးတွေဆိုရင်လည်းပေါ့နော်ပို့ပြီးမှဒီလှုပ်ဆောင်လာနိုင်တဲ့ဟာတွေလည်းရှိတယ်community toward community based approach ကကျမတို့ကရှေ့လာမယ့်ကာလမှာ volunteer တွေကိုရဲ့ empowerment ဖြစ်လာအောင်ပြီးရင် strengthening community group တွေကိုပို့ပြီးမှအားကောင်းလာအောင်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ decentralization နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်သူတို့ပို့ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်လာနိုင်အောင်ဒီဟာလေးတွေကိုလည်းလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားဖို့အဲ့ဒီအစီအစဉ်နဲ့လည်းလှုပ်ဆောင်နေတယ်ပေါ့နော် volunteer empowerment လို့ပြောလာတဲ့အခြေအနေမှာကြာရင်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကိုယ်တိုင်ဒီအကယ်၍ city audit finding တွေကိုဆိုလဲပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကိုယ်တိုင်ဆုံးဖြတ်ချက်ချပြီးမှ advocacy အပိုင်းမှာရောပေါ့နော်ဒီရှိနေတဲ့ဒီလူ community မှာရှိနေတဲ့လူတွေအားလုံးကိုအားကောင်းလာအောင်လှုပ်ဆောင်သွားဖို့ပေါ့နော်ဒါလေးတွေကိုလည်းကျမတို့အနေနဲ့အများကြီးလှုပ်ဆောင်နေတဲ့ဟာကိုလည်းတွေ့ရှိနေပါတယ်volunteer ရဲ့empowerment ဖြစ်အောင်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့2019ခုနှစ်ကနေစတင်ပြီးမှ volunteer တွေကို unpick ပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကိုယ်တိုင်စေတနာဝန်ထမ်းတက်နဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်ခဲ့တယ်ခုန2019ကနေစပြီးမှကျမတို့ဒါလေးတွေကို volunteer တွေရဲ့ mobilizer အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်အားကောင်းလာအောင်ပို့ပြီးမှသူတို့ရဲ့ empowerment ဖြစ်အောင်ဆိုပြီးမှဒါတွေကိုကျမတို့ pick volunteer အနေနဲ့ခပ်ခဲ့တာဖြစ်ပါတယ်သူတို့နေတဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုကြည့်ချင်းအပြင် soft skill လေးတွေပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကိုပုံမှန်အပြင်ကျမတို့ monitoring လုပ်တယ် coaching approach နဲ့တွားတယ် soft skill လေးတွေကောင်းလာအောင်ပြီးရင် project management skill လို့ပြောလိုက်ခြင်းမှာ technical skill ရဲ့ digital skill လို့ပြောလိုက်တဲ့အထဲမှာ project management skill မှာကြတော့သူတို့ကိုယ်တိုင် planning လုပ်တတ်တာအောင်ပေါ့နော်ကိုယ့်ရဲ့camp ထဲမှာရှိတဲ့လူတွေနဲ့ဘယ်လိုမျိုးအစီအစဉ်လုပ်နေလဲဆိုတဲ့ဟာကကျမတို့ရဲ့project နဲ့ချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးမှ plan လုပ်တတ်လာအောင်ပြီးရင် digital site ထဲမှာဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ Skype လေးတွေ Google ဟိုပေါ့နော် email လေးတွေနဲ့ကျမတို့သူတို့လှုပ်ဆောင်လာနိုင်အောင်ဒါတွေကိုလည်းကျမတို့အနိကခုတ်ချင်းလုပ်သွားပါတယ်ပြီးရင်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ volunteer တွေကို manual prevention guidebook လေးတွေနဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်သွားဖို့သူတို့တွေနဲ့ develop လုပ်တဲ့ဟာတွေရှိတယ် PSS အတွက်ဆိုရင်သူတို့ကို guidebook လေးတွေလှုပ်ထားတဲ့ဟာတွေရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်ပြီးမှသူတို့အနေနဲ့လှုပ်ဆောင်ပါတယ်ပြီးရင်ဒီသူတို့ရဲ့ဒီ community mobilizer အနေနဲ့ပို့ပြီးမှတိုးမြင့်ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်ဖို့ဆိုရင်ပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကိုလည်းကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ empowerment ဖြစ်လာမဲ့အစီအစဉ်လေးတွေဆိုရင်ဒီ volunteer တွေကိုအဖွဲ့အစည်းအနေနဲ့psycho social support activity လေးတွေကိုလည်းတင်ကြားပေးတယ်ပေါ့နော်စဉ်ဆက်မပြတ်သူတို့နဲ့အတူတကွလှုပ်ဆောင်ပေးတဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းလှုပ်ဆောင်ပါတယ်ဒီ women and girls center မှာပေါ့နော်ဒီလိုအမျိုးသမီးတွေကိုပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီ coaching လုပ်ပေးတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ camp ထဲမှာကြာရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ volunteer တွေကနေwomen group ကနေဖော်ထုတ်လာတဲ့ finding တွေကိုဘယ်လိုမျိုး advocacy လုပ်မလဲပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်သူတို့နဲ့အတူတကွကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ action plan တွေခေါ်ဆွဲတဲ့ဟာသူတို့ရဲ့woman camp ထဲမှာဆိုရင်တွေ့ရှိရတဲ့တွေ့ရှိချက်တွေကိုstaff တွေကိုပြန် share ပေးတယ် staff တွေကနေ volunteer စီကပြန်ပြီးမှတင်ယူရတဲ့ဟာရှိတယ်လို့ပေါ့နော်အပြန်အလှန်2 way နဲ့တွားတဲ့ section လေးတွေကို women and girls center မှာလည်းပြောလို့ပါတယ်ဆိုတဲ့ပုံလေးပါcommunity group တွေကိုကျမတို့ပိုအားကောင်းလာအောင်ဆိုရင်ပေါ့နော်အချင်းချင်းပေါ့နော်ဒီ information section လေးတွေခေါ်လို့တဲ့ discussion လေးတွေလုပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ women group လေးတွေ men group လေးတွေ youth group လေးတွေကိုကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော် facilitate ခေါ်လို့ပြီးမှဒီ issue လေးတွေကိုဖော်ထုတ်တယ်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့အန်ဒီဖြစ်နိုင်တဲ့အနေအထားရှိတယ် camp ထဲမှာဆိုရင်ဘယ်လိုမျိုးrisk ရှိနေတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါတွေကိုကျမတို့ဘယ်လိုမျိုး respond လုပ်နိုင်တယ်လဲဆိုတဲ့ဟာလေးတွေကိုလည်းပြောတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဥပမာအားဖြင့်ပို့ဆိုရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့အဲ့ဒီနေရာမှာဒီထဲမှာဖြစ်လာနိုင်တဲ့ domestic violence ပေါ့နော်ဒါမှမဟုတ် session နဲ့မပြည့်ဘဲနဲ့ဒီ covid ခါလာမှာဆိုရင်အရွယ်မတိုင်ခင်ထိမ်းမြမင်္ဂလာဆောင်သွားတဲ့လက်ထပ်သွားတဲ့ဟာတွေရှိတယ်ဒါမျိုးဆိုရင်သူတို့ကိုပေါ့နော်ဒါကတော့ဒါဒီ GBV မြောက်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုကြည့်ရှိလာနိုင်အောင်ပို့ပြီးမှ highlight လုပ်ပြီးမှသူတို့ကိုအမြင်ဖွင့်တဲ့ဟာလုပ်တဲ့တို့ကျူတင်ကောက်ွယ်စေအစီအစဉ်တွေကိုပို့ပြီးမှမြင့်တင်ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့ဟာတွေလုပ်တယ်ပြီးရင်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ city audit နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီဆုံးဖြတ်ချက်ချပိုင်ခွင့်ရှိတဲ့လူတွေပေါ့နော်ဒီ group member လေးတွေကိုဆိုရင်ပို့ပြီးမှ volunteer တွေကနေဒီတင်ပြပြီးမှပေါ့နော်ပါဝင်လာနိုင်အောင်အတူတကွလှုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်ပါတယ်အဲ့ဒီဟာတွေကိုရရှိလာတဲ့ finding တွေကိုကျမတို့ camp leader တွေနဲ့ချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးမှဒါတွေကို finding တွေကိုကျမတို့ assessment လုပ်သလိုပြန်ပြီးမှတင်ပြပြီးမှsub sector လိုဟာမျိုးမှာကျမတို့ပြန်ပြီးမှပေါ်ပြတဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းလုပ်ပါတယ်ကျမတို့ပေါ့နော် women group လေးတွေဆိုရင်ပို့ပြီးမှဒီလက်ရှိ women group ကနေ volunteer ရဖြစ်သွားတယ် volunteer ကနေပေါ့နော်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ camp leader ဖြစ်သွားတဲ့ဟာတွေရှိတယ် deputy camp leader တွေဖြစ်သွားတဲ့ရှိတယ်ပေါ့နော် CCCM member ကနေဒီလိုမျိုး decision ချပိုင်ခွင့်ရှိတဲ့နေရာမှာသူတို့အနေနဲ့နေရာရသွားတဲ့ဟာတွေကကျမတို့ကချင်ပြည်နယ်မှာပေါ့နော်ဒါ women and girls center မှာဒါတင်ယူရရှိပြီးမှအဲ့ဒီဝန်ဆောင်မှုတွေကိုလက်ခံလို့ရတဲ့မျိုးသမီးတွေရဲ့ပြောင်းလဲမှုဖြစ်စဉ်ကြီးကလည်းအောင်မြင်မှုတစ်ခုလည်းဖြစ်တယ်လို့ပေါ့နော်လာမယ့်ကာလမှာလည်းအများကြီးလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားဖို့လိုတဲ့ဟာတွေဖြစ်ပါတယ် Dalega robot no volunteer kane woman group de go adu the quality safety audit of FGT low nere but no eri ma ja yin di wine pyo ja re but no chama ro mye pong le swai de pi yin but no da re ru a chin chin swai nui pi ma da ko swai nui ne de pong le phit pa de community based approach ka but no di jamaro anene this decentralization go lo twa bo so yin but no jamaro project ka ne but no project team ka ne jamaro tin yu ya shi de bottom up but no the decision making practice le go but no the women and girls and damashi de lu ri ye pyo ba khwin de ko a pyo so re ha re ko le jamaro na thang pi ma da ri ko ba lo lo saw me so re ha re ko na thang pi ma but no bottom up lo twa de decision le ri kina ang jamaro da re ko practice lo de ha ri shi de pi yin volunteer re ko but no monitoring lo de ha ri shi de but no the program ka ne jamaro capacity building but no the one time your volunteer your attention but not the community ka ne lu a chet de ko tin yu re lu a de ha re ko so yin pyan pi ma atu de kwa one patient ne ai ha myo re lo sa chin a phin tu ro ye reserve kaung le ka pyaung le la de reserve kaung le re le ya shi de ai ha ka ro but no tu ro ye ko baiဆုံးဖြတ်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်သူတို့အတွက်လိုအပ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာလေးတွေကိုသူတို့ပြောတယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါမဲ့ကာလမှာကြာရင်လည်းပေါ့နော်သူတို့အနေနဲ့ဒီ woman staff တွေကိုဟိုပြီးမှ
if I could just ask the speaker if we could move to your conclusions as we've overrun your time. Thank you.
Okay. Chat up ba slide. Okay ba. Okay. ba ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါဒါလေးတွေကိုကပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ prevention and response ကိုလှုပ်ဆောင်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ပေါ့နော်ဒီ community based mobilizing နဲ့ကျမတို့ camp ထဲမှာပို့ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားမယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုပေါ့နော်ဒီ women and girls center မှာလာရောက်တဲ့အမျိုးသမီးတွေရဲ့ feedback လေးတွေကနေရရှိတယ်ပြီးရင်အမျိုးသမီး group တွေရဲ့ empowerment ဖြစ်လာအောင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ community leader နေရာရတာအောင်ပို့ပြီးမှလှုပ်ဆောင်တဲ့ဟာတွေကိုလည်းကျမတို့လှုပ်ဆောင်သွားမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော်ဒီman volunteer တွေဆိုရင်လည်း man engagement တွေဆိုရင်လည်းပြောင်းလဲလာတဲ့ဥပမာဖြစ်စဉ်တွေအများကြီးရှိတယ်အမျိုးသားကလည်းပေါ့နော်အိမ်မှုကိစ္စတွေကိုဝိုင်းကိုချင်းအဖြစ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီတာယာတဲ့အိမ်ထောင်တွေဖြစ်လာတယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာတွေကိုကျမတို့ role model အနေနဲ့ပြထားနိုင်တဲ့ဟာတွေလည်းရှိတယ်ပြီးရင်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့အမျိုးသားတွေအနေနဲ့ပါလဲပေါ့နော်ဒီcity audit ပါလဲပါဝင်ခြင်းအပြင်ဒါတွေကလည်းအရေးကြီးတဲ့ကဏ္ဍဟုတ်တယ် prevention အတွက်အရေးကြီးစေဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုလည်းလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားနိုင်ရကျမတို့ရှေ့ဆက်ပြီးမှကာလမှာလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြီးရင်ကျမတို့အနေနဲ့ပေါ့နော် community မှာလဲပေါ့နော်ဒီဟာမျိုး mobilizer တွေထားရှိနိုင်ခြင်းအပြင်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့ရဲ့ women and girls center မှာအချိန်မီဝန်ဆောင်မှုရယူနိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကလည်းများစွာအထောက်အပံ့ပြုတဲ့ဟာတွေဖြစ်လာနိုင်တယ်gender based violence နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးရောချသွားအောင်ကိုလည်းကျမတို့အများကြီးလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်လို့ဒါတွေအားလုံးဒီ gender transformative intervention ရဲ့အောက်မှာပေါ့နော်ရှေ့ဆက်ပြီးမှအများကြီးလှုပ်ဆောင်သွားဖို့လိုအပ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဟာကိုပြောရင်းနဲ့ညီကုန်းချုပ်ပါတယ်ကျေးဇူးပါ
Thank you, Jesu Tamare. I did have one quick clarification that we were wondering. It looked like from one of the photos that are men actually allowed inside the women and girls centers in Kachin?
မရှိပါဘူး Women and Girls Center မှာအမျိုးသားတွေလာရောက်ပိုင်ခွင့်မရှိဘူးဒါပေမဲ့ကျမတို့က women အခုလာနေတဲ့ဟာတွေက men volunteer လေးတွေပေါ့နော် GGPV နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးမှပေါ့နော်သူတို့ကကျင့်တန်းတွေအကုန်လုံးရထားဖြစ်တာဖြစ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီမှာသူတို့ကိုပေါ့နော် men engagement section ယူဖို့အတွက်ပေါ့နော် development volunteer တွေနဲ့ပါဝင်နေခြင်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်ပေါ့ အမျိုးသားတွေလာလို့မရပါဘူး Women and Girls Center မှာ
Okay, thank you so much. Someone was asking that during the presentation. We wanted to clarify. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask our colleague, Yara from UNFPA Jordan, if she can present. And we are running a little bit out of time. So we only have 18 minutes left, and we did want to ask a few questions. So Yara, without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Yes, hello, everyone. So I'm going to try then, since we have only 18 minutes, I'm going to try to finish sooner than
18
planned.
minutes plus another presentation.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
I acknowledge I had 10, so maybe I have 8 now. So okay, I will try to be as quick. Hello, everyone. My name is Yara, and I'm the GBV program analyst at UNFPA Jordan Country Office. So what we wanted to present today actually builds upon the presentation presented in the beginning by Laura and Sylvia on best practices on recreational activities to be gender transformative. So we wanted to display our experience in learning new skills outside the gender box in women and girls safe spaces, which we have applied in Zaatari camp and in other urban areas in Jordan. Next, please. Yeah. So in Jordan, we do work with through a couple of implementing partners, and one of our partners, the Institute for Family Health, have helped us to reach 1,271 women and adolescent girls through in-person and virtual gender transformative recreational activities. So I will go to explain more what do we mean by gender transformative recreational activities, but these activities were held between 2020 and 2021. We have started with the urban areas, and then we have introduced the activities in also 2 refugee camps, which is Zaatari and Emirati Jordanian camp. And this is still ongoing for us. As we continue to implement it. It includes many courses. I will go next and describe this, but like Zumba, sports, electricity. And what's interesting is that we could maintain implementing some of these activities virtually during COVID restrictions. Next, please. So how did we start this? How did the process go? So we started with consultations with women and girls. So we have had like focus group discussions where we have been asking women what is their preference for their recreational activities. So we did that in a very interesting way, based on the rationale that you cannot choose something that you don't know about. So what we were doing is like we printed some cards with pictures that shows different types of courses like carpentry, some women dancing, some women just sitting and having tea together, some women. So we wanted to present different pictures to the women so that they can imagine what we are proposing, because they wouldn't have had an idea on all the types of courses that we wanted to introduce. Having said that, and in line with what also Fulvia has mentioned in the beginning, that still 25% of the women only chose the innovative ones or the gender transformative ones, while 75% of the women still chose the traditional activities. But we think that's also by itself, there was an improvement, as 25% chose to just challenge the gender norms and change to new types of activities. So we started by piloting like 16 different sessions or courses with 128 women. And of course, it was not very easy to have the right trainers, right, from the women community members themselves so that they can train other women. So this was also in the camp, we have like an incentive based volunteer system. So we had like to to look for skilled volunteers or train these volunteers to be able to give these courses. Next, please. So yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning, this included like carpentry, electricity maintenance, the plumbing, and the English courses, literacy, and the entrepreneurial careers courses. These were actually selected by the women, by them explaining that it helped them to get more into the labor market and to challenge the social norms that limited the careers that women could take part of. So these were also interesting. And we also had the sports like the Zumba and the gym classes, etc., which we have also introduced. Next, please. So we've received many positive feedback from the women and girls themselves, where I'd like to read this feedback from one of the women saying that I find these courses different because women usually find such skills hard to learn and such tasks are typically assigned to men. I learned this from my husband as he's a professional electrician. I feel proud when I pass these skills to other women so that they can use them in their homes without needing help from others. So this is actually the electricity maintenance trainer who was trained, and she is one of the skilled volunteers that helped to transfer these skills to other peer women. Next, please. Yeah. So one also of the participants has mentioned that this is something new to me. We always consider that such tasks are meant for men only, but now I can do it. This proves that women are able to learn anything and to do anything. We have a small video and it's going to be in Arabic, like with no subtitles, but we just wanted like to give you a very quick glimpse of one of the electricity maintenance courses. Can you please press on the link?
I'm not sure it's going to work. My internet connection is pretty weak right now. So if you don't mind, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Can we skip to the next thing? And I'll share it with all the participants afterward.
Yes, please go ahead. Next slide, please. Can you press next slide, please?
The next slide says thank you.
No,
the lessons learned.
It's not showing, I think, to participants. Yes, now. So yeah. So some of the lessons learned, the main lessons learned that we have learned throughout this process is that we had to choose some accurate and illustrative presentation of the activities during the consultations, because in many instances, women did not know what we were talking about. So we had to, for example, as I said, print pictures and explain to women more on how, what are we talking about or what are these types of activities. Also, the trickle-down training was one of the main lessons learned. As of course, as we move in courses, we had to ensure that those women who take of the trainings, we had to build some of their capacities to be skilled trainers in the future. So when we saw that some of the women were super interested in the course or that they were really skilled, we worked more with them so that they can become skilled volunteers in future phases. And we had also some lessons learned on the application of these courses in the camps versus the host community. And there was an interesting thing that was mentioned in the first presentation on the livelihoods and income generation versus learning the skills for the women themselves. So we could see some interesting findings that in the camps, we saw that women just learned the skills because they wanted to learn them and to do things themselves, while they had major challenges to work with that skill. While in host communities, we saw that more women wanted to work, to actually do some work with these skills. So this was like some of the interesting differences that we saw between camps and host communities, and which is of course due to many many also deep-rooted norms and gender stereotypes that might be rooted in the camps more than in the host community. We also wanted to touch upon where in some instances, we had really some difficulty to find some skilled female volunteers to teach the women. So one of the skills one of the strategies that we have used some men for the first course, and then we would ask some skilled volunteers to learn the skills so that they can transfer it to women. So sometimes we have used other spaces other than the women and girls safe spaces, so that women would go to that center and then they would learn the skill from men. And this was actually interesting because, as it was mentioned also in the first presentation, of course, there are sometimes interpersonal barriers from male family members. So this helped them to be also more involved. And also for the community barriers and the cultural pride, we saw more that men were, the community could see that men were transferring these skills to women. So this was also a good practice that we have used only in the beginning to transfer the skills to the women, and then they could take that forward themselves. So I know there's not much time left, so I'm not going to take more.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Yara. And if people have questions for you, we only have about 5 minutes left, 6 minutes left, and we have to leave. But if you have a question for Yara, maybe you could put it in the chat and she will be able to answer there. And Meghana, I'm really sorry, but you have 5 minutes. Do you please go right ahead?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, it was really nice to hear from colleagues, so it was time well spent. I'll do a brief overview of the Girlshine model, as well as some of the new content from the Early Marriage in Crisis project, and some of the findings from the field testing in Uganda. Next slide, please. So, as is well documented, as everyone is well aware, adolescent girls face unique and increased risks for GBV, and unfortunately in humanitarian contexts that leads to caregivers and decision makers restricting their movement and leading to social isolation and a lack of access to essential GBV services and information about their health and rights and services. So some of these objectives for the Women and Girls Safe Space that we've been discussing in these presentations are even more essential for adolescent girls. Next slide, please. So the Girlshine program model is built built upon different research findings and evidence, including Compass and Girl Empower, and works at the individual, interpersonal, and community levels of the ecological model. It's an intervention for adolescent girls aged between 10 to 19, as well as female and male caregivers of married and unmarried adolescent girls and young women mentors. Adolescent girls are divided into groups based on their stage of adolescence, as well as some of their experiences, to ensure content is relevant. For example, older and younger, and married and unmarried, as well as sessions for caregivers are also separated between female and male. While Girlshine doesn't discriminate against adolescent girls or caregivers based on their education level, marital status, sexual orientation, race, religious beliefs, Girlshine does not engage with intimate partners of adolescent girls or fathers-in-law or any known perpetrators of GBV against adolescent girls. Next slide, please. So this is a top-line theory of change for Girlshine, and the overall outcome that we are trying to achieve is improved prevention and response to GBV against adolescent girls in humanitarian settings. Next, please. So, and could you hit the space bar again? Awesome. So these are the additional pieces of the early marriage content. And as you can see, they integrate into the Girlshine program model. So Girlshine addresses all forms of GBV, but it does not go in depth on early marriage content. So based on these gaps and formative research done by colleagues in Lebanon and Uganda, as well as a global review of the Girlshine package, the updated Girlshine available, sorry, will be available on GBV responders by the end of this month in English and French, and Arabic is forthcoming. So they're not separate from Girlshine, and if you're able to implement Girlshine, you are able to implement the early marriage content for adolescent girls as well as their caregivers. Next slide, please. I won't go in too much depth here because Elizabeth Bartolomeucci-Hughes has already given a great presentation about the differences between the curriculums, but some of the key differences are that the early marriage content is for older adolescent girls, and the focus is obviously on delaying early marriage or responding to the needs of married girls. Next slide, please. So you can see some of the positive impacts of the early marriage in crisis project field testing in Uganda and BDBD camp. For some of the norms and attitudes, we saw some really great increases in gender equitable attitudes. For example, girls responding to a statement, a girl's role is limited to marriage, household chores, and childbearing. Pre-test, 48% of girls strongly agreed, and in post-test, 95% of girls strongly disagreed. So that was great to see. And then next slide, please. For caregivers, we also saw similar differences in norms and attitudes. Their knowledge of support services was already very strong. And in relationships, which is really important, they found it easier to talk to adolescent girls about difficult subjects after the caregiver curriculum was implemented. Next slide, please. So these are just some reflections. An adolescent girl who is married, sharing that I used to have a lot of problems in my marriage with my husband and my mother-in-law, but I could not have the courage to tell my parents because I thought marriage problems are not my parents' business. I could suffer silently, and when it's too much, I tell my mother-in-law, but she tells me this is what every woman goes through in marriage. However, since I joined the program, I learned that I have to tell my parents what I'm going through. I did that, and they have supported me a lot. So that's a married adolescent girl. There was overall, next slide, please, improved communication between caregivers and girls, and increased support of girls from mother-in-laws. There was a redistribution of household tasks between girls and boys. While there were some challenges in engaging male caregivers at first, that changed over time. Once they were engaged, they responded well. And there was an overall sentiment that the activities were engaging for individuals who participated. That's it for me. Thank you.
Oh, perfect, Meghana. You did it so well under pressure. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So we have to leave now. I'm being kicked out of the lobby of where I was conducting this webinar. But we want to thank you to the Whole of Syria approach once again for sharing all the amazing work that they're doing. Thank you so much, Meta Foundation, for telling us what's happening in Kachin. I worked there 7 years ago. It's amazing to see what you all have done. Thank you so much, UNFPA Jordan, and thank you, Girlshine. People would like to know when the next Girlshine TOT is happening. So I hope you'll share some information with us on the Community of Practice. And at that, I'll say thanks to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the Community of Practice. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.